this is going to be a bit of a different book or two to review. For starters, it's going to be 3 books. But sometimes life happens that way, and really, it's 3 books because one of the books I'm going to be reviewing is my own. Troubles, Battles, and Darings. And the reason I'm doing my own book review is because, well, no one else can probably give you a more honest review of a book than its own author. And I love my book. I really do. I poured a lot of time and a lot of effort into doing it. But is it necessarily the book I originally envisioned it would be? No, it's better in some ways. In some ways, it's different. There's also the fact that I would have liked to spend a lot more time in the archives researching some of the latter chapters, because I had done a lot of archive work on it and for it. As you can see, when you look through the bibliography, it is absolutely colossal for a reason. It's, the bibliography section is this, which is a long section. And there is also a whole stream of notes and references and citations. And by the way, you can tell when I write endnotes because they are fat. They have lots of stuff in them. And there are things in there, which are worthwhile going and reading. And that's the whole reason I did it like that. But would I have liked to spend more time in the archives on the Daring class? I would have done. But the trouble is, the finishing off of the book and the last points of the book ran into Corbett and ran into everything closing down. And there comes a point in time where you have to make a decision. Am I going to get this book done on time? Or is it possibly not going to come out at all because I'm being fussy? And I wanted it to come out. Now, here is a little bit I want to read you. And it comes from page 104. It's in chapter 3, I think, from memory. No, chapter 5. The Shield and the Cannon. Battle of North Cape. December 1943 witnessed an engagement of huge import that saw the Canadian tribals, Afghanistan, Huron and Haida, representing the class, although Ashanti was involved as well. Furthermore, Savage, the S-class testbed for the battle class, was also an important participant. But before considering the Battle of North Cape and its real impact, it's necessary to look back almost a year, to December 1942 and the Battle of the Barents Sea, to understand its context and potential impact. This invasion involved Captain Robert St. Vincent Sherbrooke, a tribal class alumnus who had commanded both Cossack during the battles of Narvik and Matabele prior to his command of Onslow, and the 17th Destroyer Flotilla, which provided the bulk of the escort of convoy JW-15B during the Battle of the Barents Sea. There was a distance cover available from the Town-class cruiser Sheffield, an old shiny chef, the Crown Colony-class cruiser Jamaica, and 2 more destroyers under the command of Rear Admiral Robert Burnett, though they were many hours away. The scene was set when the Kriegsmarine heavy cruisers, including the Deutschland-class Lutzow, formerly the Deutschland, which under her previous name had provided not only the class name, but also the less successful Northern Waters counterpart to the cruiser the Graf Spee, she'd got recalled quickly because Hitler had a panic attack when he realized that the Royal Navy might sink Germany, i.e. Deutschland. The Royal Navy this is one of the interesting things when you're looking at the actual pursuit of the Graf Spee. Some people say, well, how come the Royal Navy weren't committing so many resources to sinking the Graf Spee? That's because whilst the Graf Spee was annoying and causing trouble down south, they had an idea that the northern cruiser was the Deutschland, and their first priority was to sink Germany. They are that kind of naval force. They wanted to sink Germany. Anyway, leaving that to one side, that's not in the book, but And the Admiral Hipper of the class of that name, although with 5 destroyers, along with 5 destroyers, including 3 vessels from what the Allies referred to as the Narvik class, 2 Type 36A, Z-29 and Z-30, and 1 Type 36A MUB, Z-33, as well as the pre-war destroyers one Type 1934A, Friedrich Echthold, Z16, and two Type 1934 Richard Brinson, Z4, and Fyodor Riedel, Z6. All hove into view between 0800 hours and 0820 hours on Thursday, 31st of December. What would unfold was described in the VC citation, which appeared in a little over a week later in the third supplement to the London Gazette on Friday, the 8th of January, 1943. The King has been graciously pleased to approve the award of the Victoria Cross for valour in the defence of a convoy to Captain Robert St. Vincent Sherbrooke, DSO, Royal Navy. Captain Sherbrooke, in HMS Hounslow, was the senior officer in command of destroyers escorting an important convoy bound for North Russia. On the morning of the 31st of December, off the North Cape, he made contact with a greatly superior enemy force, which was attempting to destroy the convoy. Captain Sherbrooke led his destroyers into attack and closed the enemy. 4 times the enemy tried to attack the convoy, but was forced each time to withdraw behind a smoke screen to avoid the threat of torpedoes. And each time Captain Sherbrooke pursued him and drove him outside gun range of the convoy and towards our covering forces. These engagements lasted about 2 hours, but after the first 40 minutes, HMS Onslow was hit, and Captain Sherbrooke was seriously wounded in the face and temporarily lost the use of one eye. Nevertheless, he continued to direct the ships under his command until further hits on his own ship compelled him to disengage, but not until he was satisfied that the next senior officer in it had assumed control. It was only then that he agreed to leave the bridge for medical attention, and until the convoy was out of danger, he insisted on receiving all reports of the action. His courage, his fortitude, and his cool and prompt decisions inspired all around him. By his leadership and example, the convoy was saved from the damage and was brought safely to destination. Captain Sherbrooke's available destroyers included, in addition to his own ship Onslow, Akatis and Onslow's sisters, Orwell, Obedient, and Obdurate. This number was further reduced as Akatis was left with the convoy. This whole operation was about aggression. The Kriegsmarine force, which had been brought together under Vice Admiral Oskar Kunetz, should have routed them. However, there were 2 problems. At the time, Kunetz was one of the most unlucky commanding officers in the Kriegsmarine. It had been his cruiser Blucher which had been sunk during the invasion of Norway. Most importantly, no one had told Sherbrooke that he was meant to lose. For an officer who had been inculcated into the culture of the tribal class militaries, such a concept would have been as foreign to him as the idea of withdrawing. Furthermore, no one instructed him to scatter the convoy, as had been the case with PQ-17. 6 big German destroyers and 2 oversized heavy cruisers should have overwhelmed the 4 British destroyers, and previously on occasions when these circumstances were feared, such orders would have been issued. Sherbrooke, mostly using aggressive feinting, gunfire, the threat of torpedoes, and the liberal use of smoke, drove Kunetz and his ships off. In effect, the British destroyers held off the German force through intimidation rather than actual strength, just as Sieg had against the raging mariners of Littorio early in the war. However, the greatest impact of this action was not the saving of the convoy, although that was important. Of great effect was the psychological impact on Hitler of the resignation of Admiral Raeder and their replacement by Donitz, and the threat to the continued existence of the Kriegsmarine's large surface raiders. If Hitler had scrapped them at the beginning of 1943, the impact on the rest of the war could have been enormous. It would have freed a great many ships from the home fleet to reinforce the Mediterranean and Eastern fleets, including almost every battleship and cruiser not needed for D-Day. Every aircraft carrier bigger than an escort carrier, plus most of the smaller utilitarian vessels, together with most of the Navy's cruisers. Donitz successfully headed off this domestic political attack, and it was principally due to this that in December 1943, a battleship, the Scharnhorst, was sent out to intercept Arctic convoys. This is what made the Battle of North Cape matter, not only from the British point of view, but also because of the high stakes involved on the German side. It was the last throw of the dice, an attempt to provide Scharnhorst, together with her sister Gneisenau, an opportunity to repeat the success of previous operations, including the 1939 North Atlantic cruise which sank the Rawalpindi, Operation Berlin of 1941, and the Channel Dash in February 1942. This time, however, she was alone. Following the Battle of Barents Sea, the work to repair the damage Gneisenau sustained during the Channel Dash ceased. Furthermore, Scharnhorst had only 5 Narvik-class destroyers accompanying her. However, prior to the battle, they were sent off by Contra-Admiral Eric Bay to search for the convoy, but lost contact with the flagship. With no cruiser, she was on her own, a true surface raider, but without the benefit of being far from the enemy's main fleet. As it turned out, the events of December 1943 shared a month and a geographical area with those of December 1942. Onslow was once again the leadership of the convoy's ocean escort, that of JW-55B, which was drawn principally from the 17th Destroyer Flotilla, by now under the command of another tribal class alumnus, keep turning up. Captain James Afanahi McCoy, a former commander of Bedouin. The convoy also had a close escort, which included 2 Canadian Tribal-class destroyers, Huron and Haida. The latter now the last surviving Tribal-class destroyer preserved in Hamilton, Ontario, which I still haven't been to see, and I would love to. And I hope to hear at some point that they have this book on sale near her. If they don't, I will, when I eventually manage to get out there, I will bring a box with me, which I will buy from Pen and Sword, and I will literally leave them all over the ship. You will turn up there after I visited, and you will find copies of this book hidden everywhere. Anyway. There was also a UK-bound convoy in the area, RA-55A, with a similar size escort, which included 2 more tribals, Ashanti and the Canadian Azkaban. In addition, there was Force One, a cruiser formation made up of the town-class cruiser Belfast, now another preserved ship based in London, as flagship for Vice Admiral Robert Burnett, her older sister Sheffield, veteran of the Barents Sea Battle, and the county-class heavy cruiser Norfolk. This was not all. Admiral Sir Bruce Fraser, the C&C Home Fleet, the man who had succeeded Admiral Henderson as 3rd Sea Lord, was at sea in his flagship, the new King George V class battleship Duke of York, armed with 10 14-inch guns and with an escort comprising Jamaica, a light cruiser, and veteran of the Barents Sea action, and the S-class destroyers Savage, Samaras, and the Scorpion, together with the Royal Norwegian Navy's Sword. Put in simple terms, Contra-Admiral Bay was advancing into a contested sea with one of the lower capability battleships to service at the time, mounting only 11-inch guns. He faced a newer, bigger, more heavily armed battleship, a heavy cruiser, 3 light cruisers, and 4 destroyers, with potentially availability of a maximum of 12 more destroyers, giving odds of between 9 to 21 versus 1. Bay twice managed to find RA-55A on Sunday, 26 December, but he was driven off both times by Burnett's cruisers and the convoy's destroyers. This was not without some cost to both sides. Norfolk had a turret and radar disabled by 2 hits from the 11-inch shells. Charnos also lost her radar, which prevented her from learning when engine problems with Norfolk and Sheffield left Belfast as her sole pursuer. All she had was Belfast after her. Charnos was not going to escape. Fraser was deluged with radio traffic updating him as to Charnos' position. Basically, the Royal Navy officers involved were going, what would a BT do in this situation? He would shut up. What will we do? The exact opposite. Send radio message, now! This is where Charnos is. This is where Charnos is. One point, Fraser was... Well, there is one report of him shouting, I'm getting too much data here. Or words to that effect, which might have involved more colourful phraseology and not the use of the word data. This allowed him to refine his own attack from the south and to call in further destroyers, then escorting RA-55A. Simultaneously, he ordered his attendant destroyers to surge ahead and attack with torpedoes. At 16:17 hours, Charnos was detected by Duke of York's Type 273 radar. 15 minutes later, the Type 284 radar had her. 16 minutes later, at 16:48 hours, Belfast fired a star shell to illuminate the German battleship. Scharnhorst was unprepared for what was coming. Duke of York opened fire at a range of nearly 12,000 yards, which in terms of 14-inch shell is virtually point blank. In fact, in terms of anything of naval firepower at that point, 12,000 yards is... What's the point in having armor range? There is nothing. If you were engaging Yamato at 12,000 yards with 14-inch shells, even that armor will be going, I'm not built for this. No one is built for this. Let alone Scharnhorst's armor, which was going, help. The first hit disabled Scharnhorst's A and B turrets. A second destroyed the aircraft and their hangar. Bay turned north, hoping to outrun the Duke of York. That's not going to happen. The British have cruisers and destroyers in the region, close by. There is no chance of you outrunning anything. Especially not when she's already started firing at 12,000 yards. The time for you to get out of range, you are not fast enough relative to the Duke of York that you are going to manage to get out of range before she has pummeled you. That is not going to happen. This is a point at which you either surrender or you ram. Those are your options. Ramming is probably the more honourable one and the one least likely to make Hitler think you're weak and want to get rid of the rest of the Kriegsmarine. Anyway, he tried to outrun the Duke of York, by turning north, but Belfast, along with Norfolk, was waiting. Duke of York was joined by Jamaica, and at 1724 hours, Bay sent the message, "I'm surrounded by heavy units." An hour later, at 1820 hours, Duke of York disabled the Valiant German ship's number 1 boiler room. By the way, that is Valiant for that ship. The fact it was still fighting. Let's take this on to the point. From pretty much 1648 hours, she's still fighting at 1820 hours. So that's pretty much an hour and, what you can say nicely, an hour and 40 minutes, hour and 30 minutes, hour and 40 minutes. She's still surviving after being that close to a 14-inch gun battleship. Now, we can just say this one thing. Imagine if the Duke of York or the King George V had 16-inch guns engaging at 12,000 yards. Replace basically KGV with, I don't know, Rodney or Nelson if they could go at a decent speed, or an Iowa class, and have them engaging at that range. There wouldn't have been a Scharnhorst left. It's basically Admiral Lee and Admiral Fraser had a similar approach to night actions where it involves battleship guns. You wait until you're really, really close. And then you make sure you don't miss. Because they ain't going to get a second chance. This caused an immediate drop in speed, and Fraser was able to send in his destroyers. Now they could attack, pairing up, alternately approaching from each side, while Scharnhorst tried to weave and drive them off in turn like a tired and wounded bison driving off wolves. The first set of destroyers scored roughly 4 hits, further reducing the battleship's speed. Belfast and Jamaica joined in with their torpedoes before finally Opportune, Virago, Musketeer, and Matchless arrived to unleash a further 19 torpedoes at her. Despite her motto of Immer voran, ever onward, the mighty Scharnhorst went ever downwards into the depths. Through with her. The destroyers had struck again. After his victory and the threat of large German surface vessels reduced, it is altogether unsurprising that Fraser soon found himself in command of the British Pacific Fleet, accompanied by many of the ships he had led in the home fleet. Basically, we don't need you anymore here. None of the German ships are coming out to play. Go to the Pacific. This battle was significant for the Triber class. In the Barents Sea action, their aggression and training, which was brought to the fore. During the Battle of North Cape, their presence provided sufficient capability and reassurance to allow Fraser to denude the convoy of almost everything else, and for not an inconsiderable amount of time, reasonably confident that they were safe. More critically, he could commit that what forces he had with 100% certainty that if the Germans had found a convoy with a reduced escort, a Kriegsmarine cruiser, of which Fraser was unaware, or a well-coordinated U-boat attack was launched, the general-purpose destroyers would provide a safety net in the face of any such eventuality. They were what gave Fraser and all the fleet force commanders the freedom to take risks. In addition, the 4.5-inch weapons of Savage were absolutely savage, proving to be a good choice and worth the wait for the battles. I couldn't resist. Come on, it's HMS Savage. Can you resist calling that ship Savage? No. I really, really like this book. I am incredibly proud and happy that Seaforth Pen and Sword and USNI have published it. That's, how do I put this in terms of academic terms? That's 2 of the biggest names in publishing have published my first book. And it's come out really beautiful, really lovely. I love the fact that there are so many pictures in here from the Drachenfell collection, as well as the Maritime Quest collection. I recommend both sources for authors looking for pictures. I know Drakenfell himself, although there is a special book going to him, has already been looking through his copy of this book and has been going, yes, the Drakenfell collection. In fact, there are some pages where all the pictures are the Drakenfell collection, because he does have an absolutely amazing collection. So, I like this book. I would have liked to have done more research, as I said at the beginning, in more time in the archives. But I don't think any historian is ever going to tell you, if they do, they're fully satisfied and they've done all the research they possibly can on topic before they've went the book. They haven't. But what I will promise you is this. At some point in the future, I am going to go and do some more archive research. Definitely on these books, and definitely on these classes, and definitely on the Darings, who are the class who I feel I did enough research on, but I'd like to have done more than enough research on, and their story. I'm not sure if it'll be a second version of this book. I feel that's a bit cruel to the people who bought this book, that I'd be producing a second version. But I do think I'd like to put a series of articles out on global maritime history to add to the stories if I want to. But that's me being honest. You won't be disappointed in this book, and I'm fairly sure there are going to be some people out there, because there are, what's that Taylor Swift song? Haters Gonna Hate. There are some people out there who probably won't like me, maybe don't like me, or maybe don't like this book, will say, oh, even the author admits that he didn't do enough research. No, the author is saying he would have liked to have done more research. And if you're a historian, you'll know the difference in terms of the context and nuance. But that's not the only book out there, and this is a book which I highly recommend for Christmas. If you want to keep people amused for Christmas and keep them quiet, then this book is going to keep the history bore in your life quiet for hours. Many hours of peace will be had on Christmas and Boxing Day while they devour this book. It'll be great. Now, next on the list of books to devour for Christmas Day is this one. Now, Steve Dunn is one of the nicest, kindest people you are going to meet. I know I say that a lot about some of my history colleagues, but honestly, I don't hang around with the nasty ones. Mainly because they don't like to hang around with me. Because you've seen how sarcastic I can get in my comments when people comment on my YouTube videos, and they don't actually ask a question or offer anything positive or tangible. Just go something like, oh, you're boring, or you talk too fast. Well, imagine what I'm like in person when I'm face to face with you and you are being rude or nasty to people. Me, I just ignore, but other people? Revenge is swift and painful. Verbal revenge, of course. Anyway, this book is fantastic because it's all about the trawlers. Now, I have shown you Steve Dunn's Blockade book. I've talked other books about it of his. He is an author who I have a lot of time for in his history. And you know my passion for sloops, and you know I like the smaller ships. This book is just fantastic. This book has all the stuff about the history of the trawlers and what the Royal Navy was getting into, where the crews came from, what they were doing, and it's a wonderful book. And it's a wonderful book for so many reasons. Now, I have to say, I've picked the section I'm going to read, and you can guess why, because of a certain connection. Maids of all work. The Drifter, Bracoron, originally registered at Fraserburgh, was requisitioned in January 1915 and sent to Lemnos for service in the Gallipoli campaign in the June. Armed with a single 6-pounder and intended for net-laying duty, she was soon at work setting anti-submarine nets around the British and French battleships bombarding the Turkish guns. But her duties quickly became more varied. On the 1st of August, she was sent to the beach at Cape Helles to pick up some soldiers. All the time she was under fire from Turkish guns, but Rakuten was taken alongside the beached SS River Clyde, now utilised as a quay. But 4 months earlier, a landing ship on which 6 Victoria Crosses had been won in a single day. Here the drifter filled the vessel with men before departing, still Turkish shells falling all around her. This is a tiny ship we're talking about. 5 days later, she was towing a lighter half full of coal to a collier for refilling, and from there she went back to shooting her nets off Cape Helles. Through to September, Rakuten alternated between patrolling her nets, towing lighters, and she was still doing so in December. Drifters were also useful in a number of non-traditional ways, such as towing observation or anti-aircraft balloons, the former of which were used to spot ahead for enemy submarines or just below the surface. Winching and rope handling skills were important in this task, and of course the fishermen had them. Later on, once convoy was adopted, balloons were widely used for convoy escort duty as well, towed by an assortment of craft, including trawlers and drifters. A study by the US Navy Planning Section in 1917 noted that their disadvantages included the fact that the distance patrolled equals the distance advanced by the convoy during daylight hours, fog neglected, and a surface vessel can be directed with precision towards any object sighted. Trawlers also proved to be versatile and useful outside of their original intended functions. Loch Broom was an Aberdeen trawler built in 1907 and taken up at the outset of war. She mounted a 3-pounder gun and left England on 17th March 1915 for minesweeping duties at Gallipoli. Arriving too late to take part in an inglorious failure described in Chapter 4, but from the first day of the landing of the invasion force on 25th April, her primary duty was to ferry men and stores, often in towed lighters, to and from the shore at Gabo Tep. On one occasion in May, deckhand James Clarke noticed that of the 40 soldiers they were taking to the beach, half of them were drunk. The summer brought Clarke and his skipper, J.T. Burrell, a less salubrious challenge, for they were attached as tender to a hospital ship and had to collect dead bodies from her for burial at sea. On 20th June, they picked up 3 corpses, but we are finished with the hospital job, Clarke confided to his diary, as we take it in turns, and it's not a very fine job. We buried 33 altogether in the short time we had it. But they're soon back to their more full duty. At the end of July, Clarke noted that it is not a good job, but somebody had to do it. However, things came to a head on 24th of August. They had to wait for 5 bodies, which the hospital ship wanted them to sew up and put weights into the shroud. The crew refused to man, as it's not a very pleasant job. They went to the beach to pick up some wounded instead. And by October, the trawler was making a daily run from Anzac Cove to Imbros, collecting rations, mainly beef and bread, 20,000 portions at a time. Loch Broom's war continued in the Aegean, where she had been sent in 1916 on minesweeping and anti-submarine duties, as well as being used as an examination vessel. But here she took part in what was surely her most curious adventure. On the night for the 24th to 25th July, Skipper Burrell and his crew were involved in a raid on a Turkish-held island. They towed 2 sailing vessels full of Greek soldiers, 50 men out of the 270 who formed the landing party. The assault captured over 3,000 head of sheep and cattle, and a fleet minesweeper, 4 minesweeping trawlers, and 4 drifters took part and took them all on board. At a stroke, the Turks would go hungry, and the Allied troops would feast well. At 1000 hours on the 25th, Loch Broom offloaded 400 head of sheep and goats, 11 donkeys, and a bull. It must have been quite a clean-up job after that. I like the plans in here. I like the diagrams. I like the fact that it is a full John Lambert book. I've shown you some of the weapons one, which Norman Freeman has done through. This is going through the trawlers, and it is gorgeous. It also has stuff about the envoys, the convoy, the memorials, and all the other things in there. And it's just, this is a really cool book. And as with always, there will be links down below. I have included links for my book to both the US&I, where there's a 50% sale on, and to Pen and Sword, where there's a 30% sale on, I think. And the final book, also for your Christmas purchasing, is Andrew Lambert, The British Way of War, by Julian Corbett and the Battle for National Strategy. And I know I've done lots of readings of this book, so I'm only going to do one quick reading from this book. Continental readers and serving officers invariably questioned the validity of Corbett's work. He did not expect them to follow him blindly. The British way was not a religion, unlike Mahanian sea power, and he was not an evangelist. He taught his students to think and to think logically, using the correct language, working within the national context. Some principles demonstrated that Britain had never waged unlimited war, because it was not contending for continental dominion. Even when it took part in unlimited wars, Liberal Britain was not prepared to create mass conscript armies because it had no political aims that could justify them, or the concomitant seismic social change that they would entail. While Clausewitz advised against assuming wars would remain limited, in Europe there was no rational reason why they should, this was not the case once the sea became a critical factor, as it necessarily was for Britain. Wilkinson's ignorance of naval warfare and geography led him to claim that in the absence of strong defensive positions at sea, naval warfare tends to be more decisive than land warfare and approximates more to the absolute form towards which all warfare is driven as soon as it becomes national. He wrote to discredit maritime strategy and the primacy of the Royal Navy in British policy to promote a continental military agenda. He feared Corbett's elegant advocacy would preserve the strategy that enabled a maritime state to realise her special strength. Corbett did not bother to record his perfunctory partisan notice in his diary. Far from being a radical challenge to current orthodoxy, some principles codified the strategic thinking of the Fisher years, while successive Admiralty boards approved its use on the war course. Corbett's model of British strategy reflected a sustained historical analysis of hard-won experience, dating back to the Tudor era, while working closely with successive DNIs, and that's Directors of Naval Intelligence, and Directors of the War Course for 9 years, years in which those posts were at the centre of Admiralty war planning, using the war course to test and refine evolving strategic concepts. Not only did these men attend and improve his lectures, but several read drafts of some principles. Corbett rejected the simplistic notion that strategic theory was universally applicable, and could be read across from nation to nation and age to age. He stressed the unique to contingent and specific needs of individual nations. It did not matter what strategy Clausewitz had recommended, because Britain in 1911 was not Prussia in the late 1820s. What mattered was that Clausewitz's philosophy of war enabled those in different ages and locations to shape their own doctrine, and address their own security needs. Corbett treated the Prussian theorist with profound respect, and remained deeply indebted to G.F.R. Henderson. Shortly after the publication of some principles, Corbett was elected to the Athenaeum Club, a meeting place for the leading intellectuals and men of influence of the era, a cultured institution located midway between his flat and Whitehall, well placed for working lunches and serious dinners, while possessing a fine library. Here he was among friends, discussing art, music, politics, and policy with imperial proconsuls, soldiers and sailors, artists and authors. Within months, Corbett wanted to revise his doctrine primer, updating content and adding Slade's name to the title page. However, despite some good reviews, few felt the need to buy a copy. Charles Longman was not enthusiastic. He had 700 copies in hand, he said. Sales were not very brisk just now, and he thought everyone knew that Slade was involved. Slade disagreed. The fact that we are more or less one mind on this subject is not known beyond a small circle. The opportunity passed. By mid-August 1912, Corbett was working on the Confidential History, Maritime Operations in the Russo-Japanese War, a project that continued the development of national doctrine for his core audience of naval officers and statesmen. He explained the initial Russian decision to send the Baltic Fleet to the Pacific, and been taken to secure command at sea, facilitating the invasion and overthrow of Japan. An additional force of coast defence ships was sent to provide inshore fire support for an advancing Russian army, much as Peter the Great had used his galley fleet in the 1710s. Assembling these ships delayed the departure of the battle fleet, with serious consequences. The larger point, that coast attack assets were essential to project amphibious power, reflected the ideas of Fisher and Wilson. A fleet of monitors was ordered in 1914. Corbett also examined a contemporary commerce raiding by 2 Russian volunteer fleet ships in the Red Sea and Indian Ocean in 1904. Leaving aside the dubious legal status of the ships, which were not commissioned warships, detaching prize crews soon left them incapable of high-speed steaming, emphasizing the limitations of commerce destroying under modern conditions. Neutral protests from Britain and Germany forced Russia to recall these ships and release the prizes. The material points notes are that unless such vessels are prepared to incur the moral responsibilities of sinking all their prizes, their steaming power will very quickly be reduced below operating efficiency by the drain of prize crews. In the next place, it will be seen that they were powerless to act as a serious check on the flow of commerce, except in the narrow and fertile waters where weather conditions were exceptionally favourable, in this case the Red Sea. The appearance of British cruisers obliged the Russians to move to less productive areas. This is precisely what was always found to happen in old wars. It was in fact being demonstrated that the changed conditions of naval warfare had not affected the fundamental principle on which our traditional system of commerce defence was based. Russian action only served to annoy a powerful neutral and force her to interfere. This assessment demonstrated that although Corbett failed to anticipate unrestricted submarine warfare, his mastery of strategic principles had provided the basis for a structural response. Japanese success blockading Port Arthur led Corbett to suggest the threat surface torpedo craft posed the blockading fleet had been overrated in Europe. In practice, the torpedo danger proved to be no greater under steam than the weather obstacle under sail. This may have been valid for a secondary Russian port protected by surface torpedo craft, but both conclusions would be overturned in 1914 by submarines, greatly improved torpedoes, and the unexpected willingness of belligerents to violate international law. The Russo-Japanese text continued developing national doctrine. Indeed, all of Corbett's work after 1911 was linked to a projected revision of some principles. The Royal Navy's War College would need a strategy textbook based on the latest experience. This is a very good book. Anyway, I'm trying to make sure this isn't too long. But, well, they're great books. And I hope everyone who reads this finds it as much enjoyment and interest to read as I did to write it and research it. Because ultimately, for me, it became about 3 generations of not just ships, but crews. 3 generations of men who had to fight. You start off with the tribals, then the battles, and I have to say this, I love the artwork. The artist who did this picture did an absolutely fantastic job, and thank you to Pen and Sword, and thank you to USNI for publishing it, and I hope you enjoy it. I did try and include as much of the other stuff they got involved in as possible. You have to make a decision about what a book is about. What years is it going to cover? And honestly, I decided I wasn't going to go too far into the 1950s. Because I didn't want to get into the missile age, because then things become complicated, because you have to make a decision about guns versus missiles. And also there is this false dichotomy that comes in at a certain point in the early years of guns versus missiles, of guns being this old-fashioned weapon that you don't need anymore, and missiles being everything. And we keep going back to that. That some debate keeps coming back and circling. And in reality is, you need both. I'm sorry, you need both. So I stuck with sort of the gun period, because I didn't want to get into the debates of whether or not to upgrade the Darings or build new ships. Honestly, I can understand why they built new ships. Also, you have to remember that when the tribals are conceived and the idea of the general purpose destroyer is conceived, the world is different. Their tribals are conceived in a world where the Royal Navy is maintaining the strength of aiming for and maintaining very close to 70 cruisers. So the tribals are the extra cruisers. When the Darings come into service, the Royal Navy is down to less cruisers, but they've still got plenty of cruisers. Once you're talking about the county class destroyers, the ones which next design come after the Darings, the Royal Navy doesn't have that many cruisers. And the county class are stepping up into that role openly. And they're combining missiles and guns, they are command functions, all sorts of things are being combined into these ships. And that's why I haven't gone into them, because I always almost think that counties are very much, they're heading towards the cruiser definition in some respects. Anyway, thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed the books, and links down below. Thank you for watching. Take care, and have a nice Christmas.